Hi there, everybody, and welcome back to the studio here in Cologne. We're now at the final part of our safety week. We've done 9 sessions now. Well, this is our 9th session over 3 days. Hopefully, if you've joined some of the previous ones, you found them really interesting and informative, and we've had some really good discussions. If you haven't been to any of these sessions so far, my name's John Franklin. I nearly said John Pierre. I know I was getting ahead of myself. My name's John Franklin. I'm Head of Safety Promotion here at EASA, and I'm leading the discussions on the different sessions we've had. And I'm joined here in the studio by my colleague Jean-Pierre Arnaud. Maybe you want to introduce yourself first?
Thank you very much, John. Happy to be with you. And I am in charge of safety management activities at the agency. And just to quickly introduce the session today, it has been outstanding to see that it was common to all the sessions we had previously, that safety culture, open reporting culture, just culture were fundamental, instrumental to a resilient SMS. And it was also important to notice that leadership play a key role.
Well, actually, that was the bit I was most excited about. So we've literally 25 minutes ago finished the continuing airworthiness session, and we didn't pay him at all. But a gentleman from Lufthansa that did literally the last word on that session finished with a bit of the key thing from his perspective had been the safety leadership element of how they work together, A, as an organization, and then B, communicating and collaborating with all their different suppliers and other stakeholders. And it was that leadership element and culture that really made all of the difference. So it was great that we kind of had that set up before we even started. So we'll get into the discussion itself now. And maybe the first thing we can do is introduce our panelists here. So we'll go around. Carlos, maybe you can introduce yourself first.
Hello, I'm Carlos Arenas. I'm a member of the Spanish Navy, and I've been involved in naval aviation and aviation since 2008, where I became a pilot doing the American Navy training. And then I've been flying helicopters, doing special operations and some amphibious ops in the ships for the last 11 years. And I've been 2 years flying now drones and cooperating with NATO. So I can provide the military side of the safety and leadership. And I'm a little bit of an outsider here, but I think we can see some other options and some other views of the subject.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting to have somebody from a different part of aviation, and particularly I'm from the military background originally before I joined EASA. There's something to a degree really interesting and perhaps slightly different about the military side of leadership that I thought might be an interesting dynamic into the discussion. Kate, maybe you can introduce yourself next.
Yes, thank you, John. Thank you for inviting me. Kate Bashara, I work for SkyGuide, the Swiss air navigation service provider. I am a transition manager working on the competencies of air traffic controllers for the future, and I'm also head of inclusion and diversity. I've been working in aviation for about 17 years plus now. I trained as an air traffic controller and also got a master's in social and educational sciences. And more interestingly for this panel, I was chairing the ATM Social Partners for Just Culture, who produced the Just Culture Toolbox, which was a social dialogue project that was funded by DG Employment a while back. And I'm very, very interested in bringing Just Culture into the office environment and not just having it for the front-end operators, or one could also term that as psychological safety, psychological safe space, which is really, really important, not only for safety, but also for learning and also for inclusion and diversity, which is one of my top priorities at the moment.
Fantastic, Kate. It's great that you could join us. And Jim, maybe you could introduce yourself next.
Hi, I'm Jim Pegram, Director of Safety, Security and Compliance at Easyjet. And before taking on that role, I'd held various roles: Chief Pilot, Chief Training Captain, been Instructor Examiner, Flight Ops Director, and variously along the way as necessary, the post holder for Ground Ops, Ops Control, etc., etc. So look forward to this conversation.
Great, and thanks for joining us. And finally, Mark.
Hello everyone, Mark Self, Global Director of Safety at IATA, responsible for the EASA program within IATA and also our operational safety initiatives and also corporate safety and quality assurance. So a number of roles across the world with our partners, flying for 22 years before getting involved with the UK CAA and also with IATA for 3 years now, based in Geneva.
Fantastic, and yeah, likewise, thanks for joining us. Before we really get into the discussion, I'm just going to do a few quick logistics. So for all of our participants, all of our audience, we've all been on those Zoom calls where somebody forgets to turn their microphone off or keeps the camera on and whatnot. So to save any challenges like that, the way this WebEx system we use is set up, all of the audience, all of your microphones are off, and all of your cameras are off. So if you're trying to unmute and figure things out, they're all blocked anyway, just to save any challenges, because we've got a reasonably large audience here. We have lots of ways for you to interact, and we would love your questions and input. So down in the bottom right hand corner, you should have an apps button, then with something called Slido, where you can then ask your questions of our sales and our panelists. And similarly, you can also upvote other people's questions. So it's one of the things, particularly, maybe have a look and see what other questions are there before posing your own. If you have any technical problems, things have gone pretty smoothly now. We've been doing this quite a while. We haven't had too many problems. But if you do have anything, you can use the chat function, which again should be in the bottom right-hand corner, to drop me a message as host, and JP and I'll try and figure out how we can solve whatever problem you have. We'll be recording the session and then posting all the different materials that come from this safety week on the AirOps community, and we'll also email probably on Friday all of the different, if you signed up for a session. So if you did more than one, apologies if you get multiple emails, but then you'll get the different resources that come from this, and links to all sorts of resources available from other organizations like IATA and the European Regional Airlines Association and ACI and others. And we collected those on a page in the resources to help provide as much information and support as people might need. So let's get straight into the discussion. And what we were going to start with in terms of safety leadership and culture is to kind of look at the challenges we faced and our experiences with safety leadership and its importance. And maybe Jim, if I can start with you, as at the front line of an operator, what have been your challenges and how safety leadership supported the different activities you've been doing over the last few months and years?
Well, I think the first thing is that safety leadership starts at the very top of an organization and filters all the way through. I don't think it's something that you suddenly think you need to do and make it happen. This grows and matures over a longer period of time. So suddenly thinking you need strong safety leadership now, it's never going to happen by next month, because you've got to filter it through the whole organization. And so it takes a lot of time to get in, and there's never a time when you don't need strong safety leadership. I think just the current environment is testing that to a greater extent. So I think if I then think about our own journey, I think it's about making sure that the senior management understand what's in it for them in regards to safety, that it's actually their responsibility. And we have the principle of SOC, the principle of safety, operational and commercial goals. Consider those all right from the outset, otherwise you will end up with a suboptimal solution. For example, you can take a decision to make an ops change, but if you do not consider safety, the chances are you're going to have to do some form of rework to make that activity safe, or to modify your systems to address safety. Because good safety usually means you've got a good operation and optimal commercial. If the operation's not working, that can impact safety and clearly a commercial aspect. So they're all interlinked, which means there's an opportunity here, because you can use safety to do more than just safety. You can use it wisely to improve your operation and to deliver your commercial goals. So I think it's making sure that people understand that mindset at the very top, their own accountabilities in relation to the regulations, and then getting their support. So we've been through that process, and in our company, the Johan, the CEO, has a plan. As part of his plan is to make a promise that we will be safe and responsible, and what we've done is to take that and say, okay, well, what that means is, we've. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sorry, I think we lost the connection from the room here in Cologne because everybody froze. So sorry, maybe you can go back about 20 seconds and sorry, I don't know what happened there.
Yeah, so I guess to summarize, there's an opportunity there as well, because you can leverage safety actually to improve operational performance and commercial performance, because all three are interlinked. And I think safety is something that everybody can rally around. It's a really useful tool in that respect. So in our organization, as all CEOs have, we have a plan, and part of that plan is to be safe and responsible. And what we've done is to translate what that means into what we call the integrated management system exposition. And that's a description of the organization and how it works, its approach to safety, and outlines the key processes and tools by which we will manage the whole group operations through, which supports the safety effort. You need that part as well, but the bit that really makes it work is obviously the culture. So having got the board to understand that, it's the messaging and the behaviors they then exhibit that helps change the organizational culture. So, Johan being very clear what his position on safety is, and then absolutely demonstrating it when he has to, or whether it's the CEO Peter Ballou saying, look guys, you don't come into work, you do not operate, you stop operating if you're not fit to do so. No questions. That's how it is. So and then that cascades through all of your managers and all of your workforce, and that's why it takes time to really embed it. So it's hard fought for and easily lost, but essentially I think you need the systems and process to support it, including the just culture, but then it's about actually living the behaviors and demonstrating the behaviors, because behaviors creates behaviors.
Yeah, I think in fact that you couldn't have set up for. I know Kate's the areas that Kate's so passionate about. We do a lot of work together on this. That sets up perfectly, maybe for Kate, maybe to follow on is the kind of things you've been involved in the past, and you've seen work through the pandemic, and in terms of setting up that culture that makes it that permanent living thing, and not something you suddenly say, oh, we must quickly do. And then safety leadership tick, as you were saying, Jim, it's something you really have to work at, don't you? And maybe Kate, you can follow on from that.
Yeah, thanks, John. So indeed, I agree with everything that Jim has said. I think safety is a culture. Safety takes time to be to actually embed itself in the company. I joined Skyguide just after the Überlingen accident, and we were very, very focused on safety, and we still are very much so. We see all the regulations that drive safety, the requirements for SMSs, the requirements for other, safety assessments, et cetera, And I think one of the fundamentals, and I'm going to say this a little bit differently to Jim, but I think we're absolutely agreeing, is that it's not about conformance. It's not about just ticking a box. It really is about seeing the added value that this brings to the company. And here I would add that, even audits, and so this is where I make a difference between conformance and compliance. We need the compliance, we need the extra set of eyes to come and see that we're still staying on the straight and narrow. And this is an opportunity to see how we can improve ourselves. Whereas conformance is just ticking a box and not really caring about the actual outcome that it brings. I'm very outcome focused, very performance focused in what I do. So it's not about how you get there, it's about actually getting the performance and the outcomes from the system as a whole, which is really important. And here again, I think if we are conformance-based, let's take just culture, for example, 376 says they list a certain number of front-end operators who have to report and who are subject to just culture. I argue that everybody in the company should be subject to that. It is more expensive, it requires more training, it requires the right kind of attitude right from the top, and for people to understand why. But people in the office can also have an impact on safety. It will be less direct, than turning an aircraft left or right, or not climbing to the right flight level, cleared flight level, or whatever that is. But it can certainly have an impact, and I have seen quite a few examples of that, not just in aviation but also in healthcare. Where copy-paste mistakes and people who don't want to put their hands up because they're scared of retribution can have an impact. So I'm very, very much into the just culture and bringing that to everybody in the organization with a psychological safe space. And also having the leadership from the top. Having not just management at the top. And here I must say that, with Skyguide, we're very, very lucky. We have a CEO who is completely safety focused, and for him, it's very, very important. And this sets the right tone throughout the company, because everybody then follows it. It filters down, and everybody understands why safety is so important, because it is fundamentally what we produce as an air navigation service provider. This is what we're offering the community. We're not offering to take them from point A to point B. That's Jim's job. We're offering the safety around what Jim is doing. So I think that we're very, very complementary in that sense.
Yeah, the thing that it's interesting, when we were talking earlier about the maintenance discussion we had before, and I think that was one thing that really came out similarly in that discussion was, when the further you are from, I guess, the cockpit and the front end of the aircraft, the harder it is to see your link to safety. And it's creating that environment where everybody feels part of the same thing. And Mark, if I come to you maybe now, is from your perspective at IATA, trying to instill, or not instill, that's probably a bad word, but trying to collaborate at a global level and talk about leadership in that global context. There's lots of challenges in that, but it's hugely rewarding. There's lots of opportunities, I think, there to do that. Maybe you can talk a bit about what you've been doing and what you've been finding and working on over the last couple of years, because I know it's very exciting.
Yeah, John, thank you very much. I mean, what Jim and Kate have said, I couldn't chime in with more. I think one of the challenges that we have from a global perspective is culture is so different around the world. Like table manners are different around the world. If I try and go into somebody else's culture and tell them that they should be holding a knife and fork like this, they're going to look at me extremely strangely. So it's about what are the commonalities of understanding, and actually what are the differences in application that are so critical to get other people engaged. We're in the process of delivering a number of safety talks, which will go live in a few weeks' time. And this is about CEOs from airlines and other service providers around the world, explaining what safety leadership means to them. And we're recording these at this very much point in time, and they're all very, very different. They're not wrong, they're not right, they're different, okay? And they're taking things from their own perspective. So what we're trying to do is to make sure that actually, if we develop those principles, and we've done that through the safety leadership culture principles that you can see on the IATA.org website, that actually if we can get those principles across industry, being things that everybody can sign up to, and then the application within your own local culture to ensure that this goes beyond just something that we talk about, that we can actually evidence, is really, really critical. We were talking, for example, with one of our safety group members just the other day from Japan. And he was saying, one of the challenges we have over here, Mark, is the fact that everybody, very much acts within this samurai culture still. And so everybody is very proud about the actions that they partake in and deliver. And that feedback and challenge is really quite difficult, but it's essential. And I'm speaking to somebody who's an absolute advocate of safety leadership, safety culture, and a non-punitive environment. But the fact is that in the space of their environment, it's difficult to move where we need to be, so that the organisations over there are happy to understand where things have gone wrong, to learn from those and continue to evolve their own approach to make sure that we continue to become safer. And I think, this becomes more and more of a challenge when you're looking at safety leadership and organizational leadership, and the pressure that a lot of leaders are on at the moment after one of the deepest recessions in aviation because of the COVID pandemic, is to get individuals to make sure that safety leadership sits side by side, that organizational leadership, and just we don't forget that being the ultra safe industry that we are, we can perhaps spend a little bit less time on safety than actually keeping our airlines or our operations afloat. So that multi-perspective view from around the world means that actually, looking at the way people do it differently means that, we have to just provide the tools and then provide the support to enable them to apply the practical application.
And I think this is where these kinds of conversations are so important, and that how do we support, from CEOs, boards down, with understanding what best practices. How do you balance, at a time of, so many business and, and operational challenges, how do you balance that with safety? So difficult to do that, the more we can have these conversations, and it's interesting to see some of the things coming into the Slido questions, kind of things, naturally that we know people are discussing in the industry at the moment. And actually, maybe it's interesting to come on to you, Carlos, as somebody that, in the military side, leadership in crisis and challenging situations is kind of, having been through military leadership training myself and done that kind of thing, it's something, I say more normal, but it's something that the military is designed to do. And in a sense, aviation has gone through lots of challenges, but this is something like we've never known. What kind of experiences can you share from the military side in terms of, leadership in these kinds of difficult times and crisis situations, and, what you found in your career in the Spanish Navy?
Okay, so I've worked in the Spanish Navy a lot, but in the Spanish Navy, I've been able to work with a lot of different navies of the world. Also, right now, I'm in a more Air Force environment inside NATO, and we share with too many countries. And always in the military, we say that people think that operation is against safety sometimes. That sometimes if you're trying to be operative, your safety side is going to come down. And if you are too safe, you're not able to do all the risky things you need to do. But in my experience in the time, I find out that if you involve the risk management in everything you do, if you set up process that comes with safety and where the risk is managed, then you are more operative. You are able to do more dangerous things, more things that could seem dangerous, but if they are well planned, you are able to comply them, and then you are able to comply them in a safety way. But the leadership needs to be involved. If the leadership is involved in the safety aspect of the operation, and it's involved in the process, you're able to get better results, more safe operation, and a better process, a more professional process, and safer. So we normally say that the trained personnel inside the military is our most important asset. We cannot afford to lose no one, because it's been very expensive for the country to prepare a pilot or to prepare an air crew to do something. So the most operative thing is being able to keep your personnel alive or flying, and doing the things with that perspective. I guess in the civilian side, the most important thing is to be able to show the rest of the world that you're a safe company, because it's the core of your company. So if you don't invest in safety, if the leadership is not involved in the safety and in in aviation, you're not going to be able to show that to the world. When you get an accident or you get a problem and you lose that name you have in safety, you lost the most important thing of your company. So if I compare how we try to be safe to maintain our people alive or train personnel alive, if I compare it to the civilian side, you need to be safe to be able to earn money and to be efficient as an operator in the civilian side.
Thanks for that, Carlos. And I think that's, it's a really interesting challenge. Is obviously in the military side, you're balancing the kind of physical, in some cases, the kind of physical challenge that people in the cockpit are facing, in a conflict scenario or whatever, with the safety and all of these different things, almost putting people in harm's way. And as you say, positive discussions and conversations and kind of communication, coordination is one of the key things of that. And it's something that we've, throughout the week, we've had, it's interesting, we've discovered in our WebEx a new feature when we record the sessions. It gives us a transcript and it gives us word clouds from all of the things that were discussed in the sessions. And the words communication, coordination, leadership keep coming out, particularly that, the communication coordination part. Now, kind of moving the discussion on a little bit more, and I see obviously some of the questions start coming in on the Slido, and we'll get to some of those a little bit later on in the session. But obviously, one of the things perhaps to say is, we know that, it's difficult to talk about safety, leadership and culture right now. We know there are lots of discussions about things that have been out there in the press and the public domain over the last few weeks. Specifically for us, we're not going to look at specific cases or comment on specific situations in that sense. I think hopefully what we can do is, look at, and this is kind of the next bit, and maybe if I come to you, Kate, next first on this one, is how can we, particularly, I guess, for safety managers and people in safety teams, but in organizations in general, is how can we educate, how can we help support business leaders and then the organization make that balance between safety and business objectives. We're going through these really challenging times, coming out the back end of 2+ years of a pandemic, and there's a lot of pressure on business leaders. There's a lot of challenges for the operational part of the business, and safety people kind of sit in the middle here. And the more we can open up those conversations, hopefully that's the way we can address some of the things that people are talking about in the industry at the moment.
Yes, indeed, it's very easy to tell the top leaders to just set the example, but I think that we also need to give them the tools to be able to do that and understand it. I do not think that safety and business are opposing. There needs to be a balance, yes, but without business you can't have safety, and without safety you don't have business. So I think that they go hand in hand. They're probably the two sides of the same coin. I think one of the things that is very, very important is removing any fear, removing the fear culture, removing those barriers, letting people speak up, creating that culture within which people can say, well, actually, that's not right. And they're not going to be, they're not going to have any fear of retribution for that, not just the front end operators, but again, anybody who sees something that's not right. Obviously, as with any just culture, with the red lines that are drawn as to unacceptable behavior. And we can debate a long time on where those red lines are to be drawn, but probably not today. I think another way of addressing anyone in the organization is to put yourself at their level and say, well, what's in it for them? Put yourself in their shoes. What's in it for me as the CEO? What's in it for me as the middle manager? What's in it for me as the front end operator? It's very easy to, we've been talking about this quite a lot, John, the yogurt and yoga. Let's go and give people some yoga sessions and tell them to eat yogurt, and then everybody's going to be healthy and happy and the company will run well. It's probably looks like a low-hanging fruit. It's the easiest fix, but it's probably not the best one, nor the longer lasting one. It's about having those more difficult conversations with senior leaders and telling them that, and explaining to them that actually this psychological safety, this environment of inclusion, this environment where there is speak up, is much better for the bottom line. In the long run, it just isn't necessarily a return on investment today, but it's something that will actually bring a lot of benefit for tomorrow, and you're setting the foundations and the values of the company for the long term, which will make it sustainable. I think another word that's important is sustainability, not just environment sustainability, which we all agree is very important, but business sustainability, social sustainability are also very important for companies to be able to survive things like pandemics and other downturns and disasters that we've seen in the past.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kate. And maybe Mark, if I can come to you next from a from your perspective. I remember actually when we had this discussion, we were talking about some of this last year, and I was talking about the balance between safety and leadership. And I think, safety and business objectives. And I think you summed that up much better than I could. So maybe you got some thoughts on that one.
Gosh, I wish I'd said what I wish I remembered what I said last.
No, I wish I could either. I remember this, and it was it was an interesting one.
I mean, what is this about? This is about making businesses more resilient, and that is absolutely within the mandate of being resilient from a safety perspective and resilient from a operational, a financial perspective too. It's about the overall resilience of an organization, and I think what's really clear, that leadership has to come from the top. If you're interested in governance at all, I mean, there is a very clear difference between accountability and what you're accountable and what you can delegate. And I think and my experience from the 4 years I had in the UKCA when we were looking at fit and proper people is that actually there is sometimes a little bit of confusion about what can be sort of delegated to somebody else and what always remains with you. And I think when you accept that accountability and you show that actually that's something that you are willing to lead people through, it is so darn impactful. And that leadership and referring back, not to push it, but the guiding principles that we've just had drawn up with industry partners is about not just sort of saying, right, I sign up to this, but actually I'm actively going to demonstrate it as being part of my own values to the chair, the CEO, and the rest of the board. And that impact is massive. And a previous employer that Jim represents now did a brilliant job with that. In the fact that leaders, especially in the aviation, the operational aviation piece, were willing to sort of share their own experiences and learnings, and how impactful that is, which may, on people within an organization who may not even think themselves as safety practitioners. What's really, really important is that message from the top means that everybody has a role to play in safety. And actually, even if you are not that person who is intricately knowledgeable about a system or a process, you should feel comfortable to put up your hand and ask the question and be rewarded for asking that question. And what's even more importantly than that is that you get the feedback, and the feedback from the appropriate level of the organization, okay, that actually the fact that you spoke up has made a difference to the way that the organization acts and behaves. So, I can't emphasize it enough that it comes from that accountability piece of the board under corporate law, and just making sure that accountability is empowering people at every part of the organization.
Yeah, and actually, it's interesting the way you say about that. It all flowing through the organization. Interestingly, it's in the chat. There's one of the comments about compliance and risk management, and interestingly, we created. In fact, it was when I was talking to you, Jim, at our CASCOM a few weeks ago, where gave me this kind of inspiration of how from what you were talking about kind of summarizing this. So I'm just going to quickly put this slide up, and then Jim, I'll come to you perhaps for an example of how of kind of how you use this from particularly in a leadership kind of context. So give me 2 seconds just to share my slide, and I'll try and explain. So this is one of the things we've put together as part of. It was very similar to what we did last year for the what was then called Be Ready, Stay Safe, but as part of this kind of second phase of the campaign, the Stronger, Safer Together. And what we realized was we do lots of, in aviation generally, we do lots of talking about pieces, and we have a risk to solve or a problem to solve. Yeah, I generalize, but as an industry, yeah, we're quite analytical people as a broad kind of brush, and therefore we're very good at solving things. But the more we've done of this safety marketing, for want of a better word, in safety promotion, we've been learning about corporate storytelling and just generally how do you help show people the whole. And this is part of what we created, and all of this, I'll put the link in the chat. In fact, we've got a QR code you can scan a bit later to get to the resources. But we've been talking about culture in this context, but it ends up being everything connected. And particularly, like you were saying there, Mark, is that the culture helps create people who are able to talk, and respond and have positive conversations between leadership and operational staff and safety and other people in the organization, how you manage and support the resources, but then also the different aspects of routine operations where there is a base level of, there is the standard compliance, but then there's so many additional risks that you're managing, and that's the difference between ultimately at a basic level quality and safety management in that context, is that you're looking at these additional risks, and then that you have the culture element at the top left here helps support the continual learning. And something I know I've talked to you about as well, Kate, is the challenge of we talk about just culture very much in the in the individual sense, is people talking, is the way when individuals report things happen, but actually then similarly within the organization is, when something happens within an organization, is what kind of culture do we need as an industry to support learning for organizations in general? And I think that's a really important thing. And maybe Jim, now if I come to you, because that's something we were talking about, you were showing me some great examples of how this all fits together and how you lead that in such a complex organization.
Well, I think the whole of the safety effort comes together with the operation of the aeroplane, and that doesn't start and finish with what engineering do or what flight ops do. It's far more complex and integrated than that. And I think the point I was making was that in the EASA regulations, there's a super little sentence. It says, and all aviation related risks. And when you unpack that box, it's a small title in a very big box, because you then go back and think about, well, what are the other risks that can impact the flying operation? And you would say, okay, well, health and safety. Well, health and safety on board the airplane or on the ramp or in the maintenance facilities. You think about occupational health and well-being. We don't want anybody to come into work to operate or make safety-related decisions who's not fit to do so. You think about the systems there that support the operation, such as IT. Failures of those systems can have a critical impact. You think about digital safety and how that might impact the data that the crew use in their daily operation. And then, of course, there's also the environment. You suddenly realize there's this really broad palette of issues and risks that can affect the operation at the end, but they don't all necessarily sit in operations. And I think that goes back to the point that Kate was making, which is actually your aviation system needs to embrace all of those areas. So, for example, we've just taken IT and digital safety under our management system wing for the ops critical systems, because they will have an impact on aviation related risks. So all of those things that we've been talking around, safety culture, just culture, reporting culture, learning culture, equally apply to these areas of the business. as it does directly to the more operationally focused areas that we're used to dealing with. And that's a bit of the journey we're just going through at the moment.
And actually, that comes on really nicely to something that Carlos and I were talking about when we were kind of helping prepare for this. And Carlos, you were talking about, when you have complex organizations and layers in the organization, is that how to lead by example and set that throughout the different layers and across the organization. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah. I think when you are an operator at the low level, if you receive a good training and a good formation, if you also are lead by example, if the person that is doing the job you will do in the future acts in a way that is safe, if they put safety inside everything they do, I think that gets into you. It's deep down inside of you, and you afterwards you operate the same way. If you feel like your organization is investing in you, they are training you, they are giving you formation, they are telling you how to do the things. When you get to that responsible situation, when you are the person in charge, or when you are doing the operation yourself, that's inside of you, and you operate in a safe way because you've been trained for that, and you feel that you can take that responsibility because you received the formation to do that. And also, if in the higher level of the leadership, they are willing to take that to take the responsibility of your act, of the way you operate, of the way you follow the procedures, you cannot not be safe, because you've been trained for that. They've been telling you that you need to act this way. So in the moment you are in the responsibility, you're gonna operate in a safe way. So yeah, I think that the organization, the way they train all the layers of the operation is the most important thing. And although it doesn't look like that in the moment you are going to turn on the engine of an aircraft.
And I think that's one of the most interesting things, isn't it? Is it kind of comes back to, I think many of you, all of you at some point said this in the first round of discussions, is that it's you invest a lot. Doing this is something that takes time, and quite often you build something over time, and it's very hard for people to see how the whole comes together until something happens. There's a problem or something, something that kind of suddenly shows how it all really works. And interestingly, Istvan, there's a comment in the chat there about how individuals in an organization, I guess it starts coming in terms of empathy and that kind of thing, and people having an understanding about all the different roles and challenges that different people have in an organization when it comes to safety. Is that it's very easy to see just your view. And I know, Kate, maybe if I come to you, because I know you do a lot of work on inclusion and the different aspects of psychological safety that help those conversations to happen in an organization.
Yeah, well, inclusion, I think, is really important. Psychological safety in itself is built up of variously, when one reads the literature, a number of pillars. I quite like the one that says that you need to have learner safety. You need to be able to put your hand up and say, I don't understand what you're saying. Please, could you repeat it in a different manner? I go back to my daughter who's at school, says, I don't understand, to the maths teacher, and the math teacher says exactly the same thing louder. That's not really helping her very much. That's not a learning environment. Luckily, she's moved on. We need an inclusion safety. It's not just about diversity. And here I'll maybe just go down the path of inclusion and diversity, which I call inclusion and diversity because inclusion is more important. You can sit as many diverse people around the table as you want, but if you're not going to listen to them, you've achieved absolutely nothing. If you only ever listen to people who look like you, so or act like you. So inclusion and listening to people, creating this this environment where people can speak up and they are listened to, is really important. And then it's contributor safety, feeling like you can contribute, like everybody can contribute. Whether I'm the PA or the CEO, my contribution is valid and it's valued, and there is a response to it. The famous situation, where you write a report, you report something, and it goes into a black hole. And you're told it's being dealt with, and you never ever see the outcome. That just discourages people from actually contributing anything at all. They say, well, whatever, I won't take the time to write the report next time. I'll just let the others get on with it. And challenger safety, being able to say that you can actually challenge the system. Obviously, again, within reason, you're not going to go in with bad behavior, but putting your hand up and saying, well, I don't agree. And this requires a fearless organization where I can go to my CEO and say to him, with all due respect, from my perspective, I don't agree with what you're saying. And without thinking that, well, tomorrow I'm going to be getting a letter telling me that I'm no longer working for the company. That's really, really important, because that's what brings the added value. And that's what allows the whole company to have a learning culture that will move it forward and will actually bring added value in a number of areas, not just safety.
Yeah, I think, and that, it's really interesting, isn't it, in terms of it kind of moves the discussion on quite nicely in towards the how do you do that. It's easy, it kind of feels easy to say, oh yes, we need to have culture and we need to enable people to speak out, and we need to have all of these different things. And maybe Mark, I come to you next, and I know you've got, with your whole program, it's trying to show organizations and help them actually implement this in practice. We hear lots of people, and particularly I know when I post on LinkedIn, sometimes people say, it's nice to have a webinar or post something on social media, but it's the change that actually influences. And I know that's something you're obviously trying to do at the very heart of your strategy, IATA.
Yeah, thanks, John. The challenge here is, and I think it was Jim who alluded to the time that it takes, is that actually culture doesn't change overnight, and so what are the metrics that you use to actually measure cultural change and the actual benefit that it's having on an organizational safety performance? I don't know if having launched a safety strategy 18 months ago, whether I could sort of like say hand on heart that looking at the all accident rate in aviation, which is one of the strategic priorities of the IATA board, and its reduction over a 5-year rolling average, can I say that between now and the time I retire in 12 years time, that it was actually the IATA safety strategy that had the key drivers within it that made that change. So trying to get those indicators that can be measurable is a real challenge, and then that makes it a challenge in some of the conversations we go into. And as I alluded to earlier, when we're talking about an industry that is ultra safe, I mean, in my 22 years of flying, I never had an engine failure. And I remember my father flying the BAC 111, and it was a regular occurrence. So it's like, how do you measure it? And that's one of the conversations we're trying to have with our governance groups and our safety group, and also, I guess, where I'm really focused now, and I'm seeing a number of things coming in from the conversations around the difference between the compliance piece that's also been mentioned by panelists and the risk-based piece, because on the one hand, we have made a decision in IATA that we are moving from a compliance-based IOSA program, which every IATA member needs to fulfill as an audit program every 2 years at the moment, to a risk-based program where we begin to gather those safety insights and be able to together grow from what we're seeing in those conversations. But we need to be really joined up in this approach, and we need to be having airlines, because it's related to airlines, but I mean, we need to have airlines feeling comfortable that actually, whereas before, you know, under a compliance-based framework, when we're checking 960 odd ISARPs every time we go in, there may not be that sort of number of findings that can support the airlines. How can we, with a risk-based environment, allow that learning to continue? And get that dynamic right between those people who are responsible for compliance with the airlines and maybe the board in certain parts of the world who still believe that zero findings means excellence. Findings actually are not an opportunity to learn and evolve and become safer. So I guess with the safety leadership piece, I mean, one of the core things we're trying to do within the conversations we're having, and what we're trying to do with the CEOs that we're getting to have these safety talks to present to other colleagues around the world, is actually, it's good to have challenge. It's good to maybe have a few findings come out of the woodwork where before it's just been a box ticking exercise, and it's good to sort of allow you to challenge yourselves and enable you to mature from a safety perspective, even though you may be one of the top. There's always room for more.
And actually, it's interesting because I've just highlighted the kind of #1 question at the top of the list there. And what you talked about touches on that really nicely, is that, and we see this a lot. In fact, Jean-Pierre and I have talked about it in various contexts, just generally across the industry, is that, you know, particularly, you know, we've got a continually changing environment, lots of new rules, and there's a challenge to comply with new things. You know, if you have very compliance-based audit processes, you know, whether it's from us as regulators or, you know, similarly, whether you're part of IATA or other organizations. And, you know, it was interesting, we had a discussion with the CEA in New Zealand, who were looking at a completely different kind of risk-based, kind of almost conversational oversight structure. And maybe, Jim, from your side, maybe I will come back and talk about some of the implementation bits that you've been doing just in education and leadership in a minute. But, you know, from your side as an operator, how do you see the I guess that challenge of, yeah, the people like us as regulators and others that you work with, you know, the challenges that brings you from a leadership perspective with, you know, sometimes a compliance approach, sometimes a risk approach, and that balance between the two. Sorry. Oh, you muted that.
Yeah, no, just taking it off mute. I forgot to put it on. But no, I think it's really good. And I think compliance is the cornerstone and the starting point, particularly as organizations get more and more complex, because you need to maintain the wiring in the organization for it to work properly. And compliance is very good at making sure that those structures remain in place and are working and don't falter. So, you know, that is really a cornerstone. Then I think the second thing is actually putting risk at the center of everything you do and managing those risks so that you're only embarking on those activities where you can reasonably foresee the risks and accept those outcomes. Okay, so and then of course then it's putting the measures to it. And I think in terms of safety leadership, and I'll put it back into context of this you know, all aviation related risks, because there's quite a conversation there with most of the AMB or the Airline Management Board members around their areas and how their areas can impact safety. So if I take one example, I was today actually earlier, I was talking to the people team around the work they're doing to systemize health and well-being, right, in the way that we would understand it under OR Gen 200. And one of the things that came out of it was the realization, which I don't think they'd twigged before, that their activities are a risk control for the aviation system, and they're actually controlling that risk control, and they'd never considered that in that light before. And that was a bit of a light going on for them about the significance of the work that they do. And likewise, similar conversations, as I said, with IT and digital safety. So, you know, that you know, when they recognize what their risks are to the aviation system and embark and invest and support an integrated approach to managing these risks, then I think you've got people engaged. And then I think there's other things that we've been doing for a long time, like for example in safety reporting. We don't tell them what they should or should not report, because I think there's always a reason then for not reporting. We just say report any of your safety related incidents, we'll sort it out. Whether they happened, nearly happened, you observed somebody else, it doesn't matter. Give us all the information, we'll sort it out. And we get a lot of safety reports, and some of them are not that consequential, but it's all part of that overall story and narrative around safety. And of course, you by people reporting everything that, and us giving them feedback, that helps that whole confidence in the system, and that the system works.
Yeah, and I think, in fact, it comes kind of interestingly onto, I'm going to highlight this question actually, because I think it's quite an interesting one, is how you measure safety culture. And maybe Kate, if I come to you first, and so the question we got is, do any of you have ways to measure safety culture, or suggestions on how people might do this practically with an organization? Kate, maybe you can start with that one.
That's always a difficult one, and so thanks for that. Well, we do the usual, safety culture surveys in the company, employee satisfaction surveys, etc., etc. I'm not a big one for quotas. I do believe that we need targets, but I think that the important thing is trends. If you say you want 30% of something as a target, and you're starting at 2% and you get to 28%, you've done pretty well. If you're starting at 50 and you go down to 32, you probably haven't really done what you wanted to do. So it's more about trying to set some KPIs, set some areas that you want to investigate and look at, which I would argue need to take into account the psychological safety of the environment, which would be more along the lines of probably the employee satisfaction survey, maybe feeling how included, testing how included people feel, how heard they feel, the speak up environment. So those are sort of metrics and indicators that one could use to then say, well, is our whole company really acting safely? Because one of the things that I think is also important is that it's not the safety department that creates safety, just as it's not the accountants that create the money in the company. It's everybody's business, and that's one of the things that's really important. There are obviously walkabouts on the shop floor, speaking to people, getting the feel for where the company culture is. That can be done by leaders to show that they are interested. So those are also things that are very useful. But I don't think there's a silver bullet. It is a culture, and a culture is something that is very slippery and difficult to actually nail down and put into metrics. And those metrics may have to evolve over time as well. So it's also a question of what performance are we looking for? What outcomes are we driving towards? And then looking at how we can get there with a roadmap that will be valid at that point in time.
And I think that's one of the key things. In fact, it's interesting again how I always love, the 2 years we've done this safety week, this second time around, how things come back from the discussions at the domain level into this final kind of leadership and culture session. And we've had a lot of that this week, I think, where there's no one. Whilst leadership and culture have come up a lot, communication, collaboration, but it's that there's no one thing. Like you say, there's so many different ways of doing it. Maybe Carlos, maybe if I come to you, and from a military perspective, measuring like organizational culture and how that matches to then safe flying and safe aviation. What kind of things do you do in your context?
So it's very funny because I've been in a unit where the safety reports were a measure of how safety the unit was, and it was not the unit that has less safety.
We lost.
Oh, I think we lost the connection there. Oh. We'll give it a second or two, and hopefully Carlos will come back. It's always.
Maybe I'd like to just pick up on something that Mark said. Is it's not because you've got less reports or less reported incidents that you're safer. In fact, I would argue, and this is also true in the psychological safety, if you read Amy Edmondson, the organization, the teams that work best are the ones that report most, and therefore measuring, and you need to look at metrics that are pushing the right behavior. Saying 0 incidents is just going to make people sweep them under the carpet. If you say we want all the incidents reported as a metric, then you're expecting to see more, and that's going to increase your safety because you can learn more. Just maybe something to fill in the space there.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because it's interesting, as you say, it came back to Mark was talking, you were talking particularly about that, just that education even at CEO level as to, 0 findings isn't the goal. And Jim, it was interesting you were saying about as you broaden safety across the, in other areas of the organization, or not safety particularly, but, you broaden the management system out into, IT and other areas. We look at more kind of cyber and security risks. You've got all sorts of other, interestingly, all sorts of other metrics, but it's handling them in the right way. And maybe Mark, if I come back to you for a second, and how you see that kind of the metrics side of things, if that makes sense. What can you measure?
Yeah, John, the metrics is a conundrum, as I alluded to, and a number of the other panelists have done as well. I think actually it was it was during the SMICG in EASA a number of years ago that we had a presentation from a maintenance division of one of the European's largest carriers. And, they had really spent a lot of time within their maintenance department in making sure that they increase the number of reports. And they had been ridiculously successful. I mean, they had seen the number of reports continue to increase over a very, very focused campaign. And their challenge then was, how do we maintain this? Okay, how do we continue to allow those conversations to continue? So I think reporting is a measure, but I would like to see a way in how we report the language used within reporting frameworks. I mean, for example, when I first started flying, a very old crusty captain sort of said to me, Mark, just keep the reporting narrative to an absolute minimum because you don't want to be writing evidence for your own prosecution. And, it is still sometimes, language that I hear. So, if we really want to hear about the actual detail that can't be picked up from digital sources, and actually if it's not even something that can be picked up even in one way or form from a digital source, for example, something that's going on within the ground environment, then we rely on those practitioners at the point when an activity is taking place to share their experiences and to share them without any fear of restriction or retribution. And I think we are in a bit of a pivot point, really, around certain parts of the world, because we are seeing in certain jurisdictions that the legal profession are pushing for precedence over investigations under Annex 13. So we need to make sure that we're not confusing that environment out there, because confuse that environment, all of those people who may have felt that they have been free to say things as they observe them are going to start to wind back their desire to share because of the number of events we're seeing around the world and how law enforcement agencies are trying to take the lead there. So I think we need to keep the narrative going at a global level to make sure that actually reporting continues. I think, and not pushing our own safety culture survey, but because there are a number of tools out on the market, and you may have some that you've designed internally within your own organisation. But that review is really, really important. Making sure that if you're making some changes in your business, that actually you're monitoring how that is impacted. And, you know, we have seen over COVID, one of the biggest challenges across organizations is that management of change, whether that's furloughing workforces, whether that's reducing the number of times you fly or operate in the air traffic control tower, you know, has got to be assessed to what is the unintended consequence of the actions that we've taken. And that needs to always be reviewed. So whether you're using something that IATA produces or whether you've got your own mechanism, make sure that review loop is really, really solid, and make sure that actually you're continuing to feed back the positive nature of people reporting, because it's critical that not only do they report, but they provide the texture of the events that they have observed.
And it was really interesting. And again, I feel quite positive that as we have these discussions and the way the different panels end up connecting to each other. So funnily enough, what you were talking about, as you were talking of moving to talk about a management of change there, I kind of had a little smile because we had such a really good discussion about the importance of management of change, the role, and actually we had the two guys on the maintenance panel earlier were talking about how in a hangar with no people, going through a huge change program, you know, in terms of dealing with COVID, how did you get that intelligence from people that you needed in order to understand what changes were happening, what worked and what was effective, and why all of this was going to work or not? So it was great that all kind of came together. Carlos, we lost you for a minute there, but maybe I come back to you just for briefly just next, just to say, I guess I'll evolve the question a little bit because the discussion moved a little bit, but in the military, similarly, you're continually evolving, going through change and challenges, and how do you we're talking about measuring safety culture. How do you do that kind of thing in a military kind of context?
Sorry, we lost power at home. I was saying that there was a measure. It was the safety reports was a measure on how safe a unit was, and it was not the one that has the less number of safety reports, the most safety unit. It was the one that inside their organization people were doing safety reports. Some of them were anonymous, or some of them were with name on it, but for the whole organization, it's important that people do safety reports. If they do safety reports, it's a safe organization. It's not because it's an organization looking for a change. It's an organization that finds holes and tries to fix them, and that was one of the thing that we would measure to see if a unit was safe. Another thing we were looking always is to find the risk management in every process of the unit. So we always operate with a lot of procedures that are writing down that we need to follow, and we are normally very disciplined. In all that process, we were looking for references to the risk and how to mitigate them. So those were measurements of safety of a unit we used to use, and I think that are very, very helpful to kind of measure the level of safety of an organization. But normally at the end, people inside the organization know if their organization promote safety, let them talk, and if it's the safety culture is immersed inside the unit or the organization.
I think that summed up that kind of challenge very well. And maybe Jim, if I come to you for just in terms of how you practically do that within an operational organization, what kind of things do you use to kind of help measure and then improve the culture, or continually evolve the culture, I guess is probably the best way.
So as most airlines, we've done big culture surveys before, and they're very interesting. We run a simpler set of questions during quite regular updates on culture within the company through culture surveys within the company routinely that gives us a good indication. I think the other things are the reporting rate. I think it's quite telling. I think some of the narrative and the language that's used in the reporting as well. And when I talk about reporting, I mean all means of reporting, both the safety reports, but things like fatigue reports, because often you get quite a rich contextual written report around factors there. Even where we have FDM reports and we talk to the crew direct through the FCLOs, that can give us quite a rich picture back. And of course, what you want to do is to look at that safety culture side, but you also need to look at what the outcomes are to see how you're matching. But it's often the narrative that closes the gap between, if you like, the reporting and the straight metrics, the leading metrics, and then the actual outcomes. It's the written word and the spoken word, the narrative that tells you how close you are getting to the edge.
Yeah, and I think you summed that up really, really well. There's all these different opportunities and possibilities, and it's how you evolve as an organization.
I think it's always also possible to ask the frontline staff whether they know how to report, where to report, do they get feedback when they report, all these kind of views. This kind of interview helps you to see how well safety culture is embedded in the culture of the company.
And actually, it's interesting. So it sums it up. One of the things we've been talking about is this broadness of managing risks in the organization, and actually timing's perfect. Yuri just so we've been talking. There are various people doing different work in this area, but Yuri Moose from Cargo, who's the director of safety at Cargo Lux, is currently doing some research in this area as part of his work at his study at the University of Antwerp. I'm going to just drop a link there into the chat with the survey that he's running at the moment, just to better understand how people do this integrated safety piece. So I dropped that into the chat there, and actually that's something we're going to post with some of the follow-on material from this session. So we've had a really great discussion there, and I think it's really difficult to do a subject like this justice, where we could spend all afternoon talking about all sorts of aspects of it. And before we come to Bernard with the summary of the Safety Week, I'm going to, if I maybe come around each of the panelists, Kate, I'm going to start with you first, just so you're ready. So just in terms of, you could sum up kind of one thing on safety leadership that you think is really important, maybe in a couple of sentences, what would it be from your side? And then I'll come to Carlos next.
I think it's don't look for the easy fix. There is no silver bullet. Create that psychological safe space, or remove the fear in the company so that you really do embrace a learning culture, because that's what's going to be able to show you where your company needs to go to maintain safety, and actually the business aspects as well.
Fantastic, thanks. I think that's such an important point there. And Carlos, if I come to you next, what would be your thoughts?
So I think a very important thing is that the leader is the first member of the safety section of the organization. So if he's really into safety and he lets all the organization look for ways to improve their process, I think that's the most important thing to be safe and to build safety in a company or in a unit or in an aeronautical organization.
Fantastic. Again, really great point. And Jim, maybe if I can come to you for a last thought and view on safety leadership and culture.
Well, I agree with the previous two speakers, but it's behaviours. So everyone needs to exhibit those behaviours and make it the way they do business. That's the secret, just to encode it. Safety is the way we do business, and that also includes the culture.
Fantastic. I think that's a great point. And lastly, Mark, from your side.
Thanks, John. Three things I'd like to say. Everyone likes acknowledgement, feedback, and if possible, praise. I do, and I know my children do. So I think, you know, when we're having conversations, let's try and make sure that they are positive conversations as best as possible to ensure that people feel comfortable in a place to open up. And we're very, very careful with our language and, you know, avoid things that are regularly used in some parts of the world, such as punishment committees, etc., etc. But my final point, I think, which is really important, is that we are all, you know, leaders in one way or form, and we all need to demonstrate the ability and comfort and confidence to share. So, you know, we are asking employees in organisations to share the issues, observations that they have come across. And I think we have a responsibility across the industry to continue to share those things collectively amongst ourselves. This is what we're trying to do with the Safety Risk Management Framework, which is on the IATA website. And we want people to actually feed in hazards and risks so that we continue to grow together. So let's keep these conversations going, and hopefully we'll have another chapter next year.
Yeah, no, I really look forward to that. And it's one of the things I've really enjoyed over the last 2 years or so is continually, you know, having these conversations, sharing, you know, hopefully the positive aspects of learning and development, particularly in this context, particularly with all of you. You know, we've kind of all got to know each other in different contexts a lot more over COVID, and I really enjoyed these discussions. And huge thanks to all of you, but also particularly to Carlos for joining us and bringing that different perspective also from the military side into this discussion. I'm now going to move on to the final summary of our safety week here. I'm just going to quickly share my screen so you can see what we've got here. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague Bernard, who's going to summarize our safety week as we go forward here. Excuse me a second, I'm just having a small faff with my technology. There we go. Perfect. So Bernard, who's our principal coordinator in charge of standardization and SMS activities. Bernard.
Thank you, John. Good day, everybody. And I will do this presentation on behalf of Jesper Rasmussen, our FS director, who could not attend. So this week was really the safety week at EASA. We have around 9 webinars that took place covering SMS, top safety issues, safety culture and leadership, as well as sessions for all operational domains. So the webinar was created for the aviation community to share safety challenges and stimulate discussions on practical solutions. Over 30 industry experts joined the panels, and we have an audience of over 2,000 people. So it's quite a massive impact. A huge thanks to the people the panelists who gave their time to the event. Through the discussion over the last 3 days, we shared the most pressing challenges the aviation community is facing. We have the COVID, and this COVID created this safety week. We use virtual meetings just to provide up-to-date pictures of the safety risk before the summer break. Given the challenges that we know today, it's more relevant than ever. Title of the safety week was Stronger, Safer, Together, Always. This campaign is to become more resilient, and the always part is to remind us that safety is a moving target. The speed of change is increasing, and tomorrow will be different from today in terms of safety. So we just need to continuously update the people, and the campaign focuses on 6 key principles of safe operations: culture, people, resources, compliance, risk, and learning. In terms of challenges, as we know, we have the COVID crisis, which is going on. we are not over yet. With this COVID crisis, we have shortage of personnel, loss of experience. We have the demand growing during the summer period with an appetite for traveling. And on top of it, we have now the crisis in Ukraine. A new crisis with a war and major airspace constraints, longer flights. We have very fluid security situations that requires monitoring. We have the cyber security aspect, which is rising, and we have the rising prices of oil and the inflations that makes this also an economic crisis. So during the safety week, we exchange on what works to overcome the challenge. We discussed practical solutions, and I just noted few outstanding points that were common to all the different sessions. They were also reflected through the poll in which 150 people actively participated. One of the topics that was recurrent in the discussion was we need to move away from a paper SMS towards a real effective SMS. For this, we need a robust safety management in place. We need working collaborations between stakeholders, subcontractors, regulators to identify and mitigate the risk collectively. We need also to keep this supportive attitude despite the economic pressures, because it's a European system and these solutions should be designed in common for all stakeholders. Integrated and coordinated risk management has been often mentioned as one of the important elements. So we are happy to inform that SMS is not today required for all domains, but
It is now.
it is now. It is coming now. Because
tomorrow
we
have a
are changing the
webinar on
rules,
that.
and we are now adapting it for design, productions, maintenance, up to operations. All the domain will be covered, and this is paving the way for a real integrated management system. Unruly passengers. It was also mentioned as one of the growing problems during the pandemic. Now, of course, with the shortage of personnel, the overloaded terminal, this problem might become even more strong during the summer period. So we need really to take this into account. And on the 18th of July, EASA will launch an unruly passenger campaign with the industry. So it will be part of the campaign to share common messages with staff and passengers. Human beings remain at the heart of the safety of operations. We heard that human performance is instrumental. We have to take into account that the system must have flexible people, but must also support those people. For this, we need to foster good communication, especially in a very rapid operating environment with changes ongoing. We need to train, we need to share experience as part of this effort. We have a need to keep a running reporting system from the frontline staff to the top management, so that the appropriate decision can be taken in a timely manner. And we have to encourage people to report in a just and open reporting culture. Also, the operation managers must proactively engage with their staff. All panelists mentioned that at the sessions on leadership, that has been extremely helpful to have strong leadership in place and recognize leadership for the safety culture. We also need to reduce uncertainty as much as possible, considering the impact of external factors such as technologies change, digitalization ongoing. We need also to keep in mind that uncertainty is not really liked by people. And we need to keep on being compliant with the rules. So we have to get rid of individual interpretations and look for commonly designed solutions agreed by the Safety Office. In conclusion, there will be always more disruptive events in the future, and the sharing of best practices is a very valuable tool for all of us. So I wish this week we managed to change the form from safety discussions to safety mitigations actions. End of this week, you will be able to download the videos and the material used during this event. On the screen, you can find this fancy QR code that link you to the materials. You will also find this information online on the EASA website. And today it was our objective to share all this information with you. We really appreciate having this audience for this event, and we thank you very much for this safety week. Bye.
Thanks, Bernard, and a huge thanks to all our panelists for their time in this session particularly, but also all of the other sessions we've had through the course of the week. You know, as I said, that at the very beginning and all the way through, the big thing about this is the always bit. It's kind of ironic that we do a safety week, but the main thing is we then continue the conversations and hopefully continue to support ourselves as an industry and as one community in order to continually improve the way we do safety. And you know, I saw some other questions about, particularly about safety too, and other things like this, and we didn't quite get to it, but that's one big thing that, you know, we look at, trying to look at the whole safety picture, whether that's, and interestingly, we know from a lot of the discussions there are lots of schools of thought on safety, whether it's safety 1, safety 2, safety differently, and all sorts of other things. And hopefully, whichever safety club you belong to, you will find a home with us here together. So thanks very much, everybody, for all of your time. The materials will be online soon, and hopefully we'll see you again at one of our events soon. And if you've not had enough of us, tomorrow we're doing a webinar on the ground handling regulation. We've run out of WebEx registrations, but on the event page you can find the YouTube live stream and follow us on that as well. So thank you very much. Have a great day. Thanks to the panelists again. Take care. See you soon. Goodbye.